Hi, everyone. Welcome to Your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. We are, as we are typically, live on both Facebook and LinkedIn. We welcome you in this conversation, and I think it's one you're going to want to participate in because with the great resignation underway, with so many people leaving their jobs, so many people retiring early, perhaps by surprise, perhaps before they expected to. We're going to dive into your next act, what my guest, Marci Alboher, calls your Encore. Marci is the vice president at Encore.org. She is one of the country's leading authorities on careers and workplace trends, and her focus is connecting, collaborating, and innovating across the generations. I've known Marci and her work for so long, and I'm sure many of you feel exactly the same. She's been in the New York Times, on the Today Show with me, as a matter of fact, on Nightly News, National Public Radio, AARP, USA Today. Her latest book is the Encore Career Handbook: How to Make a Living and a Difference in the Second Half of Life. And we are going to be talking about both of those things: how to make a living and how to make a difference. Marci, welcome. Thanks so much for being here with me today.
It's so good to be here, Jean.
Happy belated Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Right back at you.
Um, Yesterday was Giving Tuesday. And as you focus on encores, as you focus on second acts, I know you do so with an emphasis on doing something good for the world at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, many people are kind of working longer, and either by choice or by necessity, right? We are living longer than prior generations, but we also, because you're living longer, we have a need for continued income longer. So there's a lot of attention on what longer working lives look like. And our organization, Encore, has specifically looked at people who are choosing to make sure that work in the second half of life, or in this kind of maybe what we used to call the retirement stage of life, is work that's both meaningful to you, provides what income you need at this life stage, but also matters to the world. A lot of people have a feeling once they hit this stage of life that time's running out, or there's a lot of work left to do. We all look around us and we see that there are so many social problems and issues that we care about. And a lot of people want to use their time, talent, experience, and yes, their money, if they have that as well, to solving those problems, or help, or using their skills in a way that helps alleviate those problems.
Tell us a little bit about Encore and Encore.org, and how Encore plugs in to facilitate these second acts.
Sure. So Ungar's been around for 20 years. We do a few different things. We run some programs that show the power of the experience of older people and experienced people out in the world. And then we do a lot of work that we call narrative, which is storytelling work. And people like me are out speaking on these topics, and we write books and op-eds and try to give people ideas, and also kind of influence the conversation, and maybe also the structures that are kind of stuck in maybe some different ways of thinking. So one program that I think fits right in with what we're talking about today is called Encore Fellowships. And that's a program we've run for 10 years. And it really gets at just that kind of issue that we talked about, which is many people are hitting a new stage of work and life and thinking, how can I use my remaining career to both make a living and make a difference? So we match people who are nearing retirement age with high impact roles in nonprofit organizations or government agencies. These are time limited positions. We almost say, think of it as a baby boomer internship, like you are making a transition at a time in your life when there weren't a lot of pathways for people to make this kind of transition. So we match people in these roles, but they bring a wealth of experience, usually from the private sector, And then but many of them are working for the first time in a social sector organization. So they have to learn like a new way of operating, a new way of working with colleagues, maybe a new way of thinking of what it's like to work in an organization where mission matters more than money, where you're judged by, how many people you've fed, not how does the quarter's revenues look. So it's a lot. It requires often a lot of rethinking for people and retraining, but the skills they bring to these nonprofits are incredibly valuable. And at the end of those fellowships, many people have figured out either something about what they want to do. Many of them stay on at the organization where they were placed, either in a part-time or a full-time role. And many go on to another organization in the social sector based on the network they've been cultivating and what they've learned about how they want to plug in what kind of role and on what kind of issues and using what skills.
What's interesting about this right now is that we're at a position in our history where we know a lot of people have been pushed out of their traditional roles, um, or left their traditional roles because they were no longer working for their lives. And yet we know that staying involved, staying vital, is a big contributor to both happiness and health, as well as financial satisfaction and need. Can you talk a little bit about that and why staying engaged is so important in retirement?
Sure. So, I think when people talk about this moving on to this kind of post full time work period of life, it sounds really great to say like, "Wow, I'm free." But freedom has a lot of kind of unexpected side effects. One big thing that people feel when they stop working, especially if they've been working full time, is a lack of purpose. And purpose is really important to our well being and to our sense of self. So it can also lead to isolation and loneliness and lack of community. So many people find their community through work, find their purpose through work. So so the idea of what you can do right away, even if you're not ready or able to find a part of full-time job right away, volunteering or getting involved in some kind of civic engagement, activism. And we've seen people getting involved in political campaigns, in climate justice work, in anything that matters to you will usually do a few things. It will get you out of the house. It will get you with people who share your passion and interest. You may learn some new skills, and it could kind of point you into a direction of where you want to go. Either, again, like our fellowships, because of what you've learned on the job, because of what you've been exposed to, and because of the context you make, because we all know that most people find their next thing through their relationships, not through sending blind emails over the internet or staring at their computer.
Michael from Massachusetts says amen to that. He's watching and chiming in. If you're watching and you've got a question for Marci or you just want to comment, please post in the comments section and we'll tee you up in this conversation. One of the things that I know that people sometimes struggle with, whether we're talking about finding an appropriate way to give back or finding an appropriate way to volunteer, is how to get started. And I'd like to approach these two challenges as separate ones because I think that they are. But let's start with volunteering. Let's start with or working for a not-for-profit. If you are, let's say you're 50, and let's say you are looking ahead and you think, I'm not quite ready yet, but 10 years down the road or 7 years down the road or whatever, I'm going to want to shake it up. What are the steps to take now to prepare yourself to do that?
Oh, that's a great question. And I love hearing that people are thinking about planning, using the time while they're still employed or really engaged to try out some things. So the first thing is I would do some deep diving and thinking, what issues do you care about? What causes do you care about? Where do you find that your attention goes when you're thinking about who you would donate to, or I mean, we all saw a raft of promotions on Giving Tuesday yesterday. What spoke to you, right? We all have those. So, for example, for years, I've been involved in a nonprofit that you know about, Jean, called Girls Right Now, right here
Mhm.
in New York City. And I'm a writer, and it's a writing community that mentors New York City high school girls and gender expansive youth. And it's a way to promote leadership through mentoring and writing. And it speaks to everything I care about. I was a first generation college student in my family. I very much identify with the girls who are in this program. I wanted to be part of a writing community. So it actually really gave me a huge benefit to get involved in this organization. It's enriched my life in so many ways. I also don't have kids, and it gave me a way to meet a lot of younger people in my city. So there were a lot of things that drew me to that particular cause. So I think just the first step is really mind your interests and think of where might you like to, what kind of community might you like to be a part of.
I think that's so important, and I also think we shouldn't judge ourselves as we do that. That there's nothing wrong with focusing on causes that are important to you. I this year joined an advisory board for an organization called the Adult Congenital Heart Association. It focuses on adults who were born with a congenital heart defect. I have a son who was born with a congenital heart defect. He is now a healthy adult, but there are things that we need to know, and things that new innovations, new research, and this gives me a way to connect with other people in that community and to support that research. And so, I know we're talking a lot about climate change. We're talking a lot about social justice. We're talking a lot about politics, depending on the cycle. But if you find something that's personal to you, that means something, I think it's okay to focus there.
I think it's really I think it's very hard to do volunteer work or pro bono work or serve on a board if the issues don't speak to you. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have a personal connection like you and I just described. I mean, my husband is on the board of a disabilities organization, and he had no. It's called the Viscardi Center. It's an amazing organization. He just happened to get involved because he's interested in sports. His whole working life has been in sports, and he got involved through volunteering to be on their sports committee. And over the years, he got more and more interested, and he joined the board. Now he's learned so much about disability and accessibility issues, but he never had an awareness before he got involved in that organization. So sometimes you get in like through a side door of something you're interested in, and it opens you up to a world you didn't know anything about before.
We've got a question from LinkedIn. They're wondering what tools you use at Encore to match the mentor to the organization: resumes, interviews, questionnaires, and what percentage of assignments are remote. I'm so glad I don't have your name from LinkedIn, but I'm so glad you asked about remote, because let's table that for a second and talk about volunteering virtually. It's a whole new world.
Yeah, so great question. So first of all, the matching we do is actually pretty high touch. So we do the application is not light. It's a pretty intensive application that people go through, and it usually vets out people who are not really committed. So people have to answer many questions, talk about their background, go on an interview, and then there's personal matching, because we're working with a group of nonprofits that the clients, they have very specific needs. So we want to match them with someone who has the right skills background. This is not an algorithm based thing. We do this actually in a very personal way. So my colleagues who do the matching are very experienced at doing that. In terms of virtual, in the pandemic, all our matches were virtual. So we had a year and a half. I think people are starting to go into offices now, but for quite a long time, we were matching virtually, and it actually caused us to innovate quite a lot. We realized that a lot of the kind of professional level skills that our fellows bring to these organizations could be done virtually. We had organizations who needed to do strategic pivots, who needed to work on logistics, who needed to work on like logistics for a food pantry that operates in many cities and had to think about how to modify its work. So we have it was a time where we were placing IT people, HR people, logistics experts, communications work. Lots of that work, finance work, could be done. I mean, people were applying for PPP loans. Imagine that an experienced finance professional would be really helpful to a nonprofit organization trying to access those kinds of monies that were available. So that work, there's usually 2 or 3 ways we think about doing volunteer work. One is grassroots, like you're going to take a shift at a food pantry or deliver meals to homebound people, something that my husband and I just did over Thanksgiving. And it felt really wonderful, both to be able to do that and to meet some of the neighbors in our own community who we would never have met without that opportunity. And then there's this other kind of what we call capacity building, where you bring professional skills to an organization to help it better serve its mission. So, and then you could serve on a board of directors. And that's another way to get involved in an organization and to help advise it strategically.
When you're talking about capacity building, these are the skills that we might have had from our prior lives, our prior jobs, correct?
Exactly. They're usually skills that we would put in the kind of professional level skills. Knowledge work is often what we mean when we talk. So if you were, again, like if you have tech skills, or if you have engineering skills, or you have presentation skills, or, communication skills, those kinds of things. But, I will also say that life experience is another thing we all carry at these days. And, many of us have experience from caregiving or parenting or problem solving in other ways. And that's another way in, often, to finding ways to help organizations that need help.
If you're looking to make a match yourself with an organization, like you and your husband did this Thanksgiving when you were looking to find an organization to help deliver food on Thanksgiving, how do you go about that, right? Let's say I'm really interested in heart related causes. I'm really interested in
Mhm.
kids. I'm really interested in hunger. I'm really interested in climate change. How do you then go about finding the right organization?
So there are many, many ways to do this. There are some wonderful clearinghouses that where you can scan a lot of organizations and check them out. Places like ARP's Create the Good or Volunteer Match. You can search by zip code, by category, type of volunteering you want. And then once you zero in and see what's in your area, if you're going to try something in person, or what meets your interest, if you're going to try something that can be done from a distance, then you kind of narrow down your list, and then you have to start asking around. Can you find anybody who's ever volunteered or worked with that organization? Um, you can look them up on Charity Navigator or GuideStar, which are vetting organizations. I will tell you, for this Thanksgiving, when I wanted to deliver meals, we literally just Googled with our zip code to see what came up. And we learned about God's Love We Deliver, which we might have heard about if we were watching the Thanksgiving Day parade. Like, they are a prominent organization in our city that does meal delivery year round. And we now may volunteer with them at other times of the year. So there's a lot. And I'd also say, like, ask people in your community who are the trusted organizations. And it's really important when you volunteer to volunteer for an organization that knows how to use volunteers effectively.
That is such a good point. I mean, I know I've had that experience where you show up to do something, you show up to volunteer, and there's nothing for you to do, or what you're doing feels like you don't really matter.
Right. So I think I think there's a big issue of this is another reason why reputation matters, and word of mouth. I mean, girls, right now where I am, I'm now a mentor after having served on the board for 7 years. And I see how well the community welcomes in new mentors and gives us some training and a community. We have a Slack channel where we can meet other mentors and ask questions. And guess what, Jean? I didn't know how to use Slack. So now I have to learn how to use Slack for my volunteer role. And now I'm going back to Encore and saying, maybe we should be using Slack, on our team. So, you do learn a lot when you jump into these new environments.
You left me with two thought starters in our preparatory call, that I want to focus on because I think they're important in terms of, again, picking the right situation for you. You said it's important to ask yourself if you want to do something that feels like work.
Hmm.
How do you know?
Yeah, I think there are many different patterns, right, of what happens to people at the encore stage. There's this kind of like people who would have continued on in what they were doing, but for something, but for the industry changed, but for you feel like you aged out, but for your entity, your company went under, or the pandemic hit. Um, and I think a lot of those people have a feeling like, I'm not done yet. Like and I think that's a very common. So there the question is, how can you get back on track? Can you reskill a little? Can you pivot? Can you use the skills you had before in a new environment because the world is changing? Can you learn to work alongside younger people and try to understand kind of the new directions that are happening and see some trends? But then there are people who hit a point where they say, wow. And I think classic example to me is somebody like a teacher who's been in the classroom for 30 years. And often that person will be like, you know what? I think it's time. Like, I know so much about our educational system. I want to work in policy. I want to run for the school board. I want to work in education reform. I want to kind of stay in the world, but take all that I learned and use it in a different way, and maybe not stand in front of a classroom every day in the same way. Conversely, I've seen just the opposite.
Mm.
People who have leadership roles or management roles, and they're managing budgets and people and projects, and all they want to do is something that's more relational and more one on one. So those people are like, I want to be a healthcare navigator. I want to coach people in wellness, or I want to do something that's like incredibly. I mean, I've seen people who go into something spiritual at this life stage and feeling like, I've been in the world of the concrete for all these years, and I want to move to something that feels a little more, um, more spiritual, or more in line with my internal values. So there's no one pattern as to what we want. So it is really important, and that's why in the book I look at like these different patterns, and I was fascinated by people who fell into these different patterns and then what they did to try to nurture or tease out what was happening for them.
You also said it's important to figure out your balance, and the balance we're talking about here is the balance between doing good and needing to make money. I mean, what we know about many people in quote unquote retirement is that we often have a need for some income. We're trying to put off taking Social Security until we're closer to
Mhm.
70 so that we can max out that payout. We're trying to leave money in our retirement account so that it can continue to grow. Maybe we don't need to make as much as we did during our higher earning years. Maybe we're fortunate enough, we've got a pension or we've got an annuity that's bringing in some guaranteed lifetime income, but we need something. So,
Mhm.
so how do you strike that balance?
Right. So I think I earlier in my career I focused on this concept, the slash career, where people have many identities and are trying to figure out how to position them, right? How to create a balanced portfolio, really. Like we talk about in the financial world, what if you had a balanced portfolio in the identities that you moved between? So some people kind of do hit just the balance you're talking about by moving, let's say, from a corporate world to the nonprofit world, and they work part-time or full-time in a similar kind of career, but in a career in a sector that doesn't pay as highly, and that's a great way to continue an income stream. And our Encore fellows are often that model. There's a lot of other people who compartmentalize their life a little more, where they'll spend a chunk of time on activism or cause related work is completely unpaid but really important, and then they'll have a consulting practice or a side gig where they side hustle side gig where they do something that is really, it could be anything from a small business that you run around any of your talents or skills. You could consult on web design or bake cakes or any of the things that are your kind of money generator. But also this stage of life, to be honest, people are making room for travel, for family, for caregiving. Many people are not done raising their children and find that they're needed in their grandchildren's life, and they're needed for older parents or relatives or partners or friends. So, life is multidimensional, and it's really hard to just look at one part of this without thinking about the other pieces of the pie.
These are things that I'm hearing from the millennials in my life and in my company, and even the members of Gen Z who are younger, that unlike maybe some of us who were really all in on our careers at a younger age, they want to be, you call them slashy, they want to be a slashy earlier. And that's okay too, right? To make room for this sort of volunteering and this sort of charitable component in your life earlier is okay as well. It's
Oh, I
it's
mean,
great.
well, the truth is also it's very possible to blend this and say, like, these are the values that I care about. I'm not actually going to just thinking about it in my giving or my volunteering, but I want to work for an entity, even a for-profit entity that puts climate first. Like, I mean, there are people who are making, I think younger people are really kind of blazing the trails in thinking like that. And I think a lot of their parents are catching up to them and thinking, yeah, I see that model. That makes quite a lot of sense. And life maybe could be a little less fractured if you make those kinds of choices.
We've got a few minutes left with Marci, so if you guys have questions on LinkedIn or on Facebook that you'd like to type into the comments, now is the time. We're talking about volunteering, we're talking about giving back, we're talking about Encore careers. So yesterday, as you mentioned, was Giving Tuesday, and like you, boy, did I have a lot of outreach showing up in my inbox, primarily through email. And these were causes that had my email because I had supported them in the past, some in a big way, some in a not so big way. Perhaps friends had fundraisers or participated in some sort of an event and I'd showed up. And so I got a lot of outreach, and it makes you think about the fact that you have to be choosy when it comes to the money that you're giving, because for all of us, money is a limited resource, and we want to give wisely, we want to give well, we want to give in a way that makes a difference, but we also want to give to the causes that are meaningful to us. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be strategic. Kind of think at the end of the year and the beginning of the year are both coming up right now, and I think at the beginning of the year I try to think about what can I allocate to give to causes throughout the year, knowing that there are going to be crises around the globe that I'm going to hear about, I'm going to want to support. There are going to be needs to help in my own backyard, things that happen in your community that you want to be part of a mutual aid group or some kind of support thing that crops up. And then there are the few organizations that are near and dear to your heart. You know their work, you know they're doing good work, and you want to keep them going. And then all your friends will invite you to their causes, and that's where you do have to be selective. And I have actually declined. Sometimes I give a really modest contribution and say, in honor of this event that you're reaching out for, I want to do a modest contribution, but just know that my charitable giving is allocated somewhere else, which is why I'm not giving more this time. Like, have a stock answer you use that makes you feel comfortable. And I also like to leave myself open to something I'd never encountered before that catches my interest and feels worthy and important. The other thing I want to say is there's ways to pool giving that actually make you feel part of a community and give in a way that has a bigger impact than your $20 here. So giving circles are a really popular tool. There are women's giving circles. There are topic focused giving circles where people come together and they
What
pool money, and then the community decides where to give that pooled money so that it can have a bit greater impact than a smaller donation from a group of separate people.
do you find a giving circle, or do you start a giving circle?
You can do either. Yes, you can You can form a giving circle, and there are definitely resources out there on how to do that, or you can join an existing giving circle.
If you're trying to figure out which charity, let's just say we're talking about cancer or we're talking about climate, there are a lot of organizations. How do we figure out which organization is right for us? How do we know if we should go national or local? How do we know if we should go with, you know, how do we choose?
Yeah, those are highly personal questions. And I think the first step is to do some research, identify the organizations that you think are doing good work, look them up on the various rating organizations, do a little Googling, hear what they've been up to, maybe go to some of their online events. All of these organizations now join their mailing lists. Hear about the work that they do out in the world, and try to go to an event where you can meet people who have worked with that organization or support that organization. And there is never going to be an answer on which is the exact right thing to do and what's the benefit of local versus national. I mean, for issues you care about, there is some benefit to doing either, but there's also some benefit to splitting your giving on both a local and a national level, so that you're learning about how progress is being made both here and in other settings. So I'm sorry if I'm giving you like an everything answer, but
No,
you,
I
there's no one answer to that.
I've heard two things about um, different parameters you should think about when you're giving. The first is something called the program ratio. If you go to a site like a Charity Navigator or the Wise Giving site from the BBB, and you're looking, or GuideStar, one of the pieces of data that they will serve up is the percentage of money that goes to program, as opposed to the percentage of money that goes to administration or other fundraising. um, Early in my career, as I was reporting on these things, I was told program ratio must be above 70%. Later in my career, I heard actually it doesn't have to be that high, because you're penalizing younger organizations that really do need to spend a little bit more just to get going, and that there are some types of charities that have higher expenses than others. Where do you shake out on this issue of program ratio?
I think it's a really good question, Jean, and I think it's important to pay attention to. But I would not treat it as a golden rule that can't be violated. I think there are lots of good reasons why money is being spent to expand operations or to hire qualified staff. Or so I think it's really important to separate those things out. But I do think it's important to understand how the money is being spent by organizations that you contribute to, so you can decide if you think that's a smart way, and a way that you feel comfortable supporting in your own giving.
The second tactical question I have is about giving on a monthly basis rather than giving annually. When you give to a charity these days, it's very, very common to be asked, well, would you like to just put your gift on monthly autopilot? Pros and cons?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain things that feel kind of like a subscription, and that feel like the kind of thing, like I do it for my local public radio station all the time. I kind of give in that way. It reminds me that I'm helping to keep the lights on, that I use that service, that almost every day of my life. I think this has a lot more to do with your own budgeting and how you manage your money than it does the organization. I mean, the organization, it's like auto subscription on a magazine. They've got you if you agree to the auto subscription. Whereas if you give once, they have to retain you, and they have to do that work to get you to resubscribe. So I think more important than anything is to just think about, is there something that feels like it's going to make you feel like you're living your values every day when you see that coming up as a monthly reminder in your statements. And um, if you're getting to know an organization and you're not sure how committed you want to be term, that's a really good time to do a one-time contribution and then learn about the organization from what they are telling you they've accomplished and from perhaps the touch points you have with it before you commit to an ongoing relationship.
As we wrap up here, let's round back to where we began. You've spoken to so many people about the transition from the first part of their life to the encore part of their life. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned? What are some of your favorite stories?
Okay, so the one huge theme is that at this stage of life, the people who are the most satisfied and connected are the people who have figured out how to have relationships with younger people.
Mm.
So it can happen in your family. It can happen through what we're talking about, volunteerism, activism, and it can happen through work. So there's one organization I love to recommend on this front. It's called Circle, and I am a member. One of our innovation fellows, Charlotte Japp, is the founder, and they match older and younger people in cross-generational mentorships. So it's a co-mentoring community.
I'm going to ask actually Molly to put that in the chat
Sure.
because I know that the spelling of circle is a little bit odd.
Yes. Another big, commonality is that these transitions take longer than you think you're going to take. So I love that we started this conversation, Jean, with you encouraging people to plant the seeds earlier than before you're ready to make a move, because you may try out several things. You may have detours. Life happens. And I think it's important to give yourself some freedom to experiment, to try different things, and to not feel, I just started this, I must go down this path, if it's not feeling right for you and giving you what you were looking for. So I think people need, and then the final thing which can cure that is, don't go it alone. Find community in doing your Encore transition. So find a buddy, somebody who could be your accountability partner, where you check in with each other and encourage each other to go to that activity and take that class or make those calls every week, and not feel like you're kind of working on this completely on your own.
Such good advice. Marci, if we're looking for more information on you or more information on Encore, where do we go?
Encore.org, I would suggest joining the mailing list. We actually also have a great webinar. We have monthly webinars, and next week we have a webinar with Third Act, all about climate activism, older people joining with younger people on climate activism. You can learn a lot in that webinar. You can follow me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and really signing up for Encore's newsletters is the best way to keep up with opportunities and information that we share.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. This was a total pleasure.
Same here.
And for the rest of you, please join us at our website, which is protectedincome.org, if you're looking for more information on how to line up your finances so that you can enjoy all of these opportunities during your Encore stage of life. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jean.